Wine is the largest food product without a contents label and no nutritional information.
That's just shocking. What's up, YouTube? Thank you so much for joining me back here on my channel. Thank you also for subscribing if you haven't already. I really appreciate that. Of course, you want to hit that like button and ask any questions or drop any comments below this episode. So today I want to have on my show an expert in the area of natural and organic wines. For me personally, listen, I don't know a lot about wines. I'm just going to tell you that. I also know that I feel like crap if I drink if I drink a cocktail, I usually feel like crap the next day. Sometimes with wine, I feel like crap the next day. But then I've also found that if I drink an all natural wine, I don't feel that. So I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of things I want to know, especially following up on a recent research that showed up in the New York Times that seemed to imply that people who are health conscious drink more. How could that be? I thought that drinking was unhealthy for you. We know that it's a toxin. So what's the deal? Is red wine better for you than white wine? If you are going to have an adult beverage, what is the healthiest alternative? All of those questions and more will be answered today by my guest, Todd White. He's the founder of Dry Farm Wines. He also happens to be, believe it or not, one of those people who says wines, all alcohol is toxic. So if you are going to indulge, you definitely want to know what it is you're putting in your body and how it's going to impact you and how it is to know what the labels actually mean here in the United States, because there's so many like crazy things that go on with marketing and labeling and the things that go into our domestic wines, again, conventional wines here in the US, that you don't even realize what it is you're putting in your body. So I'm excited to have Todd on the show. Again, he's the founder of Dry Farm Wines. I'm an affiliate for Dry Farm Wines. True transparency. I don't care if you drink Dry Farm Wines. I really don't. I just hope that if you are going to be drinking alcohol, that you'll take a look at what it is you're putting in your body, right? And try to find a healthier alternative. If you do want to look into Dry Farm Wines, you can use my code, which we'll put below in the show notes here, but it's dryfarmwines.com/Chalene. That gets you an extra bottle for free. Actually, not for free, for a penny. And I think you'll love it. Anyways, you'll learn more about how that all works here on the show. Without further ado, answering all of your questions about alcohol and what it is you need to know about the labeling, etc. My friend and the founder of Dry Farm Wines, Todd White. Todd, thank you so much for joining us here again. It's time, because I think so many people are really confused about alcohol consumption and wine, and there's a lot of, I guess you could say, interesting marketing tactics around organic, and so you're the expert. So I thought, who better to bring on the show to talk about this?
Thanks. I appreciate you having me. I'm excited to be here. The thing that strikes me today, really, and we were talking about this just before we came on the show, is the toxicity of alcohol. So I really want to talk a lot about that. And just having come off a dry January, it wasn't dry for me, but but we saw an unprecedented amount of people pause their drinking in January, unlike any year before. And we have a whole theory about why that happened. They've now returned, but and it wasn't like gigantic, but it was unprecedented for us, because we're a wine club, and so people paused their subscription or pushed it to the next month.
Sure.
Like thousands of people did, and it was more than had ever happened before. So I do, as we were talking about in the beginning, I do want to talk about alcohol and its toxicity. But as it relates to organic, wine is very confusing if you care about your health. Mm-hmm. It's not confusing if you're just going in the store and buying it. But so let me clear up a couple of confusing terms to people.
Okay.
One, I drink and sell what are called natural wines. Natural wine is a very confusing term to consumers, because they say, well, aren't all wines natural? Mm-hmm. And the answer is no, most are not, for the reasons that I'm going to describe for you. And then there's the organic wine category. Mm-hmm. So organic wines simply mean that the fruit was farmed organically. It doesn't mean the wine is natural. And again, we'll talk about what natural wine means. So if you go in the store and it says organic wine, that doesn't mean that it's natural. It just means it was grown organically. Now, all natural wines are always grown organically or biodynamically, but not all organic wines are natural.
So then
So
the term natural trumps the term organic, I would assume.
it
That's what you're
does.
saying. Okay.
It does because now this is further confusing because in the food space, right, natural is often used to describe something that is not really organic or even healthy. It's just a marketing term.
That's the answer to this. Okay, so, and excuse me for interrupting, but this is the part I think that really confuses people because we've learned this clever technique when it comes to marketing, the marketing of food. But what you're sharing with me, if I hear you correctly, is that the term natural, as it pertains to alcohol, has a different standard. And is
As
that
it
regulated?
pertains to wine.
As it pertains to wine.
Natural wines is a defined category that includes always organic or biodynamic farming and two other attributes that I'll describe for you in a moment. So that's just sort of the kind of part. Then you've got this term sustainably farmed.
Yeah.
These are people who want you to believe that they're organically farming, but they're not, right? And so you see sustainable farming, right? That's just code word for I use chemicals when I want to. Okay, or when I need to is what they would tell you, right?
Okay.
So you've got organic, sustainable, natural. It's all very confusing, but let's start back at the beginning about why this is important and how it happened, right? Because this all comes back to money and greed.
Yes.
This is what happened in our food supply, and this is what's happened in the wine supply. Now, what I mean by that is that for the last 20 or 30 years, the industry's been rolled up or consolidated with Wall Street money. And so, meaning that a handful of characters make most of the wine that you see in the store when you go in. Now, these multi-billion-dollar marketing conglomerates, the top three of these marketing manufacturing wine conglomerates make 52% of all U.S. wines. And the top 30 companies make over 70% of U.S. wines. Now, I'll tell you why that's important. It's important because they're not trying to make wine healthier or better. They're trying to make it cheaper and faster.
Of course.
Well, the cheaper and faster part comes in with a lot of chemical farming, what we call industrial farming. And by the way, it's fair to note, because I'm going to throw a whole lot of information on you, it's fair to note that everything I'm going to tell you, including the industry size I just pointed to and the three main players and the top 30 players, all this information's on the internet. So you don't have to believe me. You can verify anything you want. This is not marketing speak. This is factual. It's not my opinion. Right? So when you go into the grocery store and you see rows and rows and hundreds or thousands of bottles, right? Most of those wines are made by just a handful of companies. Now, they don't want you to know that. So they hide behind thousands of brands and labels with farmhouses on them, or animals, or chateaus to have you believe that you're drinking from some family farm, when in fact most of these wines are made in gigantic wine manufacturing plants in Central California. You can see pictures of them if you Google online. There are tanks, wine tanks, for as far as you can see. These are multiple football field big factories. All right? Now, in order to make wine like that, cheaper and faster, you have to use chemicals and additives. And this is where part of the problem comes in. So not only we have chemical farming, but there are 76 additives approved by the FDA for the use in winemaking.
76 additives that they can put in the wine, and do those appear on the label?
Well, that's another problem. See, there's no contents labeling on wine because the wine industry has spent millions of dollars in lobbying money in Washington, D.C. with their friends at the government to keep contents labeling and nutritional information off of wine. So if you care about sugar, you can't see how much sugar is in your wine. And if you care about additives like dimethyl dicarbonate, which is highly toxic and is used to treat tens of millions of gallons of wine a year, right? It's used to treat the single most common bacterial fault in wine known as Brettanomyces. It's a highly toxic chemical. And you can't see if it's in your wine or not because there's no contents label on the bottle. Wine is the largest food product without a contents label and no nutritional information.
That's just it's shocking.
None of this is an accident, of course.
Right.
The government and the wine industry and the alcohol industry, in addition to wine, have been in collusion with the government since Prohibition in the 1940s, early 1940s. The laws remain today practically unchanged since that time, including the grotesquely unconstitutional three-tier distribution system, which is how you get wine in the store in the first place. So this whole monopoly is controlled by a handful of people about how wine gets distributed into the store in the first place. Now, we only sell wine direct to consumer. Mm-hmm. We don't sell to restaurants or retailers. If we did, we'd have to sell through what's known as the three-tier system, driving your prices up ultimately for quality products. So here's how this works. Each state controls how wine gets in your store.
Okay.
You are required to sell to a distributor who's approved and licensed in that state, who then sells to a wholesaler. The wholesaler then sells to a retailer, and the retailer then sells to you. And there's markup all along the way.
Of course.
And this is mandated under federal law. Now, this originally, as I mentioned, these laws go back to the early 1940s. And this originally had great intent because at the time, alcohol during Prohibition was controlled by organized crime. And so these laws, known as the three-tier Tide House rules, were put in place to prohibit organized crime from controlling alcohol distribution in the United States. But that problem has long, long passed, right? What it's used today is to block competition, drive up prices, and give consumers less choice. So that's part of the money and legal aspects of it that what's wrong. And then, so these 76 additives, it's fair to note that some of them are actually natural.
Okay.
But some of them are very toxic. The problem is you don't have the choice as to whether to drink them or not because you don't know if they're in your wine.
Is this why many people, myself included, will come or have this experience where you could have one glass of wine and, for myself, speaking from my own personal experience, feel the next day like someone roofied you and just feel like sick and super hungover from like one glass of wine, where in other instances you might be able to have no impact, but you can feel really, really sick from wine. It's one of the reasons why I was never a wine drinker.
Here's the thing. We don't know for sure because there's no studies, no control group. Like with a lot of nutrition, we don't have any idea what's actually making you feel bad in wine. Here's what we do know. When you drink natural wine, you don't feel that way.
Right.
Right? But there's any number of variables. It could be excess sulfites. It could be biogenetic amines, which are very high in commercial wine, like histamine and tyramine. It could be the use of GMO lab cultured yeasts that are found in commercial wine. It could be sugar. It could be these toxins. We don't know. Here's what we know is when you remove all that, and also it's fair to note, drink lower alcohol wines. We'll talk about that in a moment. Because alcohol, when we get to that, but before we go to alcohol, let's talk about what a natural wine is so we can clear that up. So natural wines are always organically farmed or biodynamic. Biodynamic farming is a prescriptive advanced form of organic farming. They are always fermented. This is a little confusing. This is the most confusing one. They're always fermented with wild indigenous native yeast. Commercial wines, like you find in the store, you won't find natural wines in the store. We'll talk about that later too.
Wait, hold up. You can't find natural wines in, like, if we go to Bevmo or
No.
insert name of wherever.
No.
Really?
No.
This is news to me. Okay, I'm
Now,
shook.
you can buy natural wines in certain markets like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago. There's one, I live in Miami Beach. There is one natural wine bar here and three natural wine restaurants. And Miami is the fastest growing city in the United States right now. right? And so there are 3 restaurants that sell natural wine, and there's 1 natural wine bar in the fastest growing city in the United States. So if you live in Denver or Wichita or Houston or Atlanta, you're not going to find natural wines, right? And so, and I'll tell you how to find them. You don't buy them from us. This is not about me selling you wine. This is about educating you about why you should drink natural wines, lower alcohol wines, sugar-free wines, why all these things are important. If you get natural wine somewhere else, that's fine. There are 2 ways for you to find natural wine if it's in your market. You can do a Google search for it, or you can download a smart app on your phone called Raisin, like the dried grape. And it's based in Europe. It's not super active in the United States, but it is active in key markets like New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles. And so if you live in those places, you can download this app and you can find natural wine retailers. Like there are 2 in San Francisco.
Okay.
There are probably a dozen in New York. If you're in London or Paris, they're everywhere.
Does the app also show you restaurants that offer?
It will show you restaurants that feature natural wines. But natural wine makes up less than 0.1% of all worldwide wine. So it's really, really small, and we're the largest buyer and reseller of natural wines in the world. So it's just a very difficult to find. You certainly won't find it in your grocery store. But, and if you go into a wine retailer, many of them don't even know what it is. If you ask wine professionals, many of them won't even know what it is. 3 years ago, no one knew. Today, because I've told a few million people about it, and there has been a lot, because they're healthier, and you experience far fewer, if any, negative remnants or side effects from them, they have become increasingly popular, right?
Have they? I know they're less popular here in the United States. Are they more so popular in European countries?
Yes, but particularly France. Because France is sort of the birthplace of this movement. Now, wind the clock back 50 years ago, all wines were natural, right? 100 years ago, every wine in the planet was natural, right? These technical interventions came in the last 50 years. Like irrigation is a technical intervention. The name of my company, Dry Farm Wines, we don't allow our grapes to be irrigated. And so more than 99% of grapes in the United States, we don't sell domestic wine because there are no wines here that meet our criteria. We have very stringent health criteria. We'll talk about that in a moment.
If you were to find a company, obviously domestically, that did, would you carry that wine?
We would. The problem is they just don't qualify for a whole bunch of reasons we can talk about later. It's not really that important at the moment. But let's get back to the 3 cornerstones of natural wine: organic farming, biodynamic, native yeast fermentation. So at the time of harvest, every grape berry in the world has a white waxy film on the skin. You can scrape it off with your fingernail. It looks like a very, very thin coat of white wax. Like if you were to rub off some wax paper onto it, that's what it looks like. And that's actually yeast. And that yeast was collected through the air naturally and natively from the vineyard where the fruit was grown. That yeast is what natural wine growers use to ferment the grapes in what's called a spontaneous fermentation. We're going to get back to that in a moment, what that means. But you see, this yeast is wild. It's unstable. You can't make wine in very large quantities with it. It's just it requires a lot of coddling. And so as a result, commercial winemakers, conventional winemakers, everybody who's not natural, they don't ferment with it. They kill it, and then they inoculate it with a GMO, an altered yeast that's been grown in a lab that is altered to be sturdy. You can buy it in various flavor profiles. It will withstand a higher alcohol environment. And so these yeasts are modified to be easy to work with. So it's those yeasts that are being used which is why we work with almost 1,000 small family farms, is because natural wine growers can't produce wine in very large volumes using native yeast.
That makes sense.
So And then number 3, natural wines are additive free. They don't contain these toxic additives and manipulations that occur in and preservatives and colorings and all the things that are going on in conventional wine. So now let's take it one step further and talk about, before we go to the kind of next layer here, we talk about the dry farm wine standard. So there's not a certification yet for natural wines. France will be the first country to certify natural wines next year. But dry farm wines has a certification process, a certification we stand behind.
And does every wine, or, so I think the first thing I want to clear up is I think there's this misconception that dry farm wines is in fact a winery that produces one type of wine, one flavor profile. Because I'll hear from people sometimes that'll say, "Oh, I tried dry farms once and I didn't care for the taste." I'm like, "Well, you tried one wine then, likely." So can you clear up exactly?
Yeah. So we don't make
dry farm wine. What do you mean by that?
We don't make wine. We curate wines from we select wines from small family farms who meet all of our criteria, which is far and above just being natural, and I'll tell you what they are in a moment. So we select these wines that meet our criteria. Of the wines that we taste and test, only 27% of them are selected for our portfolio. It's rare to hear that people don't like the taste of our wines. We believe that they taste better, but if that happens, the good news is we have a 100%, no question asked, 100% happiness promise. Any wine you don't like, we'll replace or refund to you immediately. So not liking a wine is of zero financial risk to you with us. All it requires is a text, an email, a telephone call, or a pigeon to let us know, and we will immediately,
That's
without
awesome.
any further questions, either fully refund you for that bottle of wine or send a replacement bottle at our cost.
Thank you for clearing that up.
So dry farm wine certification is, it's got to be natural wine, so it has to meet the natural wine criteria. Number 2, these are additional qualifications that must be met for it to be certified by us and selected by us and lab tested by us. Sugar-free. So not all natural wines are sugar-free. The only way to know if a wine is sugar-free is to lab test it. You can't always taste sugar in wine. You can, obviously, if it's very sweet, like a dessert wine or something, right? Or a port, or whatever. Of course, you can taste sugar in that. But for lower sugar wines, you can't always taste it because the acids in wine. So this sugar-free, lower alcohol. And we're going to come back to lower alcohol and alcohol right after this. So lower alcohol, we don't sell wines over 12.5% by volume, and as low as 6%. It's been a cornerstone of our brand from the beginning that people should be drinking less alcohol. And
well, that seems like that seems like a real surprising contradiction that someone who owns a wine company would be a proponent of conscientious consumption. And so speak to that, if you will, because I know you're a very health conscious individual.
Yeah, I mean, it's how I got in the business, because I was already a biohacker and, was keto, and even today I'm modified ketogenic. I only eat once a day. I've been eating once a day for almost 5 years. Our whole company is dedicated to this way of life around consciousness, meditation, fasting, low or slow carb, natural foods, whole foods. So that's just our lifestyle, right? And that's how we got in this business. Actually, it was kind of an accidental business. I was looking for a healthier way to drink wine. But let's go to the alcohol thing real quick. We can come back to the certification thing, because this is really important. There's a whole bunch of problems with alcohol and drinking. And some people shouldn't drink at all. And it surprises
and when you say that, do you mean people who have a problem with alcohol in general? And I mean moderation?
And addictive behaviors and so on and so forth. Here's the thing. Alcohol is a very dangerous neurotoxin, and it ruins millions of lives a year. And nobody expects me to say that because they think I'm here to sell wine. And I'm not selling wine. What I'm doing is educating you on how to think about drinking, right? And if you're going to drink, if you choose to drink, look, my life might be enhanced if I didn't drink wine. I have no idea. I love wine, and so I've made a decision to drink it, and I've made a decision to drink it in the healthiest possible way.
That's
and
fair.
So that's what I'm selling is education around conscious consumption. If you're drinking to check out instead of tap in, then I think you should think about your drinking habits. And so for me, I drink natural wines, which have a spiritual quality for me to tap in. I don't want to check out, right? And so if you're drinking shots, you're checking out, right? And so if you're blacking out, you're checking out, right? If you're going to drink, and there's plenty of evidence on either side of the coin to suggest that there are health benefits to drinking and that there are unhealthy consequences from drinking. You got studies on ProMed to support both topics, so we don't need to debate that. Nobody really knows. The problem with nutritional and anything that we put in our body, the problem is that we don't have really high quality control group studies. Because A, we can't follow a control group over a far enough period of time unless we were to use prisoners, right? Which is unethical. We can't follow anybody who claims to know all of the answers to nutrition or supplements. This is hooey. We don't have control group scientific studies for long periods of time. Now, we've got some things like the Farmington Heart Study, right, that went on for 50 years. But the problem with it is we're depending on people's representations of behavior.
That's right. You've got to self-report, and we know that people are not great about self-reporting. It's almost impossible.
Right, and then you've got a lot of cofactors. You know, people who drink natural wine tend to exercise more, right? I mean, people who drink natural wine also eat organic food products and go to farmers markets and probably walk a lot, right? Because that's who they are. And so it's, you know, there's a study that just came out. It was a big article in the New York Times that people who exercise drink more. Well, I'll tell you the correlation there for me is because people who exercise want to feel better and people who drink like feeling better from drinking, right? So he's like, of course people who exercise drink more.
I've got to take a look at that study. That's pretty surprising to me.
Look it up in the New York Times. It's just published a few weeks ago. But so, again, this is a lifestyle choice. And if you're going to drink, I think you should drink natural wine, low alcohol, sugar-free. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. You don't have a lot of other choices, right? So your other choices are factory products, right? Beer, seltzers. Beer's too high in maltose sugar, makes you fat. Sorry, just does. Plenty of evidence for that. Maltose sugar is a particularly glycemic type of sugar. All sugars will create a glycemic response, a rise in your blood sugar, and then flooding your bloodstream with insulin from your pancreas in order to level off your blood sugar. I come from a school like many of the people who endorse and support our products, health leaders, that most chronic illness today is due to the hyperproduction of insulin. And so I choose not to drink sugar, right? Sure. Or eat it either, on very rare occasions.
And again, just to clarify, there is no labeling on conventional wines for sugar content or carb content. At a minimum, those things are not labeled.
Nothing, zero, anything on any bottle. And is not required. That's not an accident. Again, the industry, in collusion with the government in Washington, keeps it that way. So alcohol, we talked about this early in the podcast about alcohol and its, its myriad of legal and collusion problems. But, it's the industry wants to keep you in the dark. I mean, it's just built that way. And it's not likely to change. I mean, there's just no movement for it.
Yeah.
You know, most people, you know, I'm giving you another example. Alcohol stated on a wine bottle is not required to be accurate by law.
Say that again?
Alcohol stated on a wine bottle. Now, most people don't even pay any attention. They don't pay any attention whether it's 12% alcohol or 16%. Okay. The amount, I'll tell you, they should care for the reasons I just described to you. Alcohol is poisonous. They should care. Mm-hmm. But most people don't notice. But the point is, if they did look, the amount of alcohol stated, I say stated, on the wine label, by law, is not required to be accurate.
What in the what? This is just crazy.
Yeah. No,
the more I learn about our government and the things, the collusion that's happening.
Well, this is across all industries.
Of course.
It's just wine until I came along and told a few million people who've told a few million other people. It's like, and I discovered all this by accident. I was a biohacker and a health and fitness enthusiast for my whole life, and I've moved to Miami like lots of other people now, but I lived in the heart of the Napa Valley, which is the most important wine appellation in North America and one of the most important in the world. I lived right in the center of Napa Valley. And people there don't talk about it. I mean, it's just like none of this is talked about.
You know, and to play devil's advocate, in that natural wines are, well, at least the dry farm natural wines are lower in alcohol content. What about that person who's listening going, well, then does that mean I have to drink twice as much to feel
No, trust
what it
me,
is I
you'll
want
get
to feel?
plenty buzz. You'll get your buzz on just fine. In fact, it's more gentle and it's a lot more lovely. Because it's just a much slower kind of gentle, like a symphony. It's just a more gentle sort of lift and rise. And actually, because of the gut-friendly and other bacteria that are found in wine, natural wines, because they haven't been sterilized with sulfur dioxide. See, all conventional wines have been sterilized and preserved. Natural wines have not. So
and
they're still...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so they're still living. They taste like they're alive. Right, and the reason for this, I like, this is really important. So ultimately, the quality of the wine, assuming that it's additive free and that, you know, it doesn't contain any of these poisons, the quality of a wine is going to be determined by the quality and character of the grape, the fruit, because that's mainly what's in it, absent putting out other things in it as conventional wines do. But so this quality and character of the grape is very important to, and here's how I like to use this analogy to think about natural wines that we sell. It's not just organic. It's way, way more than that. And what I mean by that is that if you go to the farmer's market, right, and you see vegetables that are grown by small family farms with love and living soil, right? I mean, these are like people who are dedicated to a way of life. You can see them and you can look at them and you know they're dedicated to this way of life. And those vegetables at the farmer's market and fruits, they are beautiful. You want to, like, they're so vibrant. The veins of them, they're so bulging and like so vivid. You oftentimes take photographs of these fruits and vegetables at a farmer's market because they're so beautiful, right? You go to the organic section of your grocery and they don't look like that, right? Because they weren't grown with that same love and commitment. Mm-hmm. They were grown organically in what I call industrial organic, right? And so it's different. And the wines are different in this way, too, because the wine grapes, these people live this way of life who make natural wine. They're not doing it for money. There's no money in natural wine. Natural wines are also inexpensive. So, I mean, our wine, all sells for the same price. It's $25 a bottle. And so for a fine wine, handcrafted wine, that's super affordable. Now, I realize for many people that's a special occasion wine. And for some people, it's not. But for a handcrafted fine wine product, that's very reasonable in price. So, My point is there's no real money in it. It's not like you're selling this, pedigreed wine for $100 a bottle, right? So,
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, if I can, some rapid fire questions, because I asked my audience, what do you want to know as it pertains to your health and what it pertains to drinking wine and alcohol? And so, if you're game, I'd love to send a couple of
sure.
these your way. One of the questions is about champagne. I thought all champagne came from a certain region of France. Therefore, if I'm drinking champagne, am I drinking wines that meet the French standard of alcohol consumption, or do I need to be worried about that here conventionally too?
Well, here's the problem with champagne. You are correct. All let's call it sparkling wines.
Okay.
That's the category. So the category is sparkling wines. Champagne is grown in the Champagne region. It is a sparkling wine for which is grown in Champagne. There are 3 or 4, I don't remember, I think it's 3 natural wine producers who make sparkling wine in Champagne. And we sell those. Mm-hmm. There are other wines, sparkling wines, made in the same style. So there's a number of styles for making natural wine. But the Brut style, the one that's made in Champagne, there are other regions in France and Italy and other places around the world that produce sparkling wines, and in California. They don't meet our criteria, but there are other regions who produce a Champagne-like sparkling wine using the same methodology. And then there are other sparkling wines that don't use that methodology, right, that make sparkling wines in different ways. It results in a different texture of the bubble, more or less, and a different brightness of it. But to answer your question, the problem with champagnes is they oftentimes contain sugar. And there are very few natural wine producers in the Champagne region.
Okay. Next question is, what is it, which is healthier, red versus white?
Well, there's a fair amount of debate about that as well when we get down to real hard science. But that being said, the conventional thinking is that red wines are healthier because they contain about 4 times as many polyphenols, flavonoids, antiflavonoids. And the most famous of these polyphenols is called resveratrol. It's been shown to extend lifespan in mice in laboratories. There's debatable science on whether or not it actually does anything in humans and how much of it you'd actually have to consume to get any benefit. Mm-hmm. But these polyphenols, they're around 200 or ish in white wines. They're over 800 in red wines.
That makes sense.
And so red wines are typically thought to be healthier for that reason. And these compounds have been shown or suggested to have cardiovascular and some neurological benefit. So for that reason, red wines are generally considered healthier. But when you get down to hardcore science on it, that's not really, nobody can really prove that. So again, the other thing is that white wines are typically higher in sugar than red wines. Now, our wines are sugar-free across the board, but I'm just saying if you were just buying conventional wines, typically white wines contain more sugar.
Now, I'm curious what the difference is for, because I'm not, I would say, an expert on wines, that's for sure. I just like the taste of dry farm wines. Some of them. Some I haven't, and I change out those bottles. The ones I fall in love with, I call and I say, like, hey, can we curate this perfect box for me? And it's been amazing. But I know that some people are really particular about aged wines. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, these wines, natural wines, typically are not aged. Most people don't age wine. I'm saying most, the vast majority of people. 90% of wines purchased or drank within 24 hours of the time they were bought. So, aging wine requires preserving the wine. natural wines don't contain any preservatives.
So does that mean a natural wine, if I were to keep a bottle of natural wine myself for say 5 years?
5 years, you'd be fine.
Oh, okay. So what are we talking about when we're saying like
15,
they don't
20 years?
Ah,
No,
that makes-
10, probably not.
I see.
Not, it maybe. It depends upon, really in that case, it depends upon the sulfite content. So how much sulfur is in it? So sulfur is either naturally occurring or it's added. In conventional wines, it's added. In natural wines, it's naturally occurring. So any fermented food, fermented beverage, along with many other types of food, but anything that's fermented contains naturally occurring sulfites. And contained sulfite on the bottle was a scare tactic that was put on by a very conservative lawmaker from South Carolina who was a teetotaler and didn't drink and wanted to dissuade people from drinking wine. All fermented, let's be clear, sulfites are not dangerous unless you have a specific allergy to them, in which case you'd probably be carrying a EpiPen in your pocket.
Okay, so if someone does have a sulfite allergy or a sulfite
It's super
intolerance,
rare.
Okay.
It's super rare. We do lab testing on all of our wines for a whole bunch of criteria, among them being sulfites. Just to tell you kind of what the sulfite measurement is, in the United States, the limit of sulfites in wine can be up to 350 parts per million. This is how it's measured. At Dry Farm Wines, we don't allow wines containing more than 70 parts because that is what we believe is the upper limit of naturally occurring. But our average wine contains 39 parts per million. That's all naturally occurring, of course. And so while we rarely see anything, we rarely see anything above 50, but we set a limit at 70 because internationally that's thought to be the kind of height of what could be naturally occurring.
Generally speaking, and maybe I know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyways, is there a detectable difference in the flavor profile of a natural wine versus one that is not?
A considerable difference for a whole bunch of reasons. So particularly with our wines, because we only sell lower alcohol wines, and not all natural wines are lower in alcohol, and because we sell sugar-free wines, and not all natural wines are sugar-free, because the wine has not been sterilized and preserved, it's still living, and so it has energy to it in a way that conventional wines, which have been sterilized, do not. And then, in addition to that, because it's lower in alcohol, it tastes a lot lighter. It's fresher. Alcohol adds density to wine. And the American wine market, particularly those people who drink big wines and,
what does big
expensive
wines
mean? Big wines are like, big Cabernets.
Okay.
Dense big wines that,
Okay.
just cover your whole palate with, like, just boom.
What's happening there? Why do those taste different?
Well, there are two primary reasons why those wines taste different than our wines. One, they're much higher in alcohol. And so alcohol adds density. Number two, they have been through a manipulation known as extraction. And so what extraction means is that, and this is relative to red wines. So what extraction means is that the maceration period, the time in which the skins and the juice were in contact, is extended for several reasons. Now, what does all that mean? Well, when you make white wine, you make it from free-run juice. So here's what that means. No skin contact. You press the skin, you put the berries and the stems and everything in a big press, and you press the juice from the berries, and that pressed juice runs into a tank. And you ferment, and you start your fermentation with just this free-run juice, no skin contact. That's how white wine's made, which is one of the reasons you don't have any tannin structure in white wine. Red wines are, again, the same process. The fruit is put into a press. The press pushes the juice into a tank, and then you actually shovel, but you move the skins and the seeds and the stems that were left over from the press, and you put those in the tank with the wine.
I just have to wonder how many people right now are picturing Lucille Ball and Ethel in that tub.
Right. Well, that's largely ceremonial.
Okay. I
so,
digress.
No, it's most small family farms actually go through that ceremony in the beginning of their harvest, where a bunch of people jump into a tank and squash grapes. I've done it many times. It's, when you're at harvest in Italy or France, it's just sort of like there's the beginning of the blessing of the grapes, the beginning of the harvest, the ceremony of pressing of harvest and pressing the grapes. So anyway, then this maceration period, or what leads to extraction. Maceration is the time that you leave the skins, seeds, and stems in red wine. It's the number of days or weeks that you leave the skins in the fermentation. This extraction, when it's left in longer, makes wine darker, and Americans believe the darker a red wine is higher quality. Not true, but that's a widely held belief. Then number two, it's darker. Number two, it has a bigger tannin structure, which makes it bolder and bigger.
Okay.
And so depending upon the other thing that makes these wines bigger and richer is that they were higher in sugar at the time of harvest.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. So many people in my audience asked, how is it possible that a wine, or champagne for that matter, can be low in sugar or even sugar-free? Is there a process that they have to go through?
It's not a process. It's a style. It's a technique. And so here's how it works. Champagnes are different. Sparkling wines are different because there's a secondary fermentation that happens to make a sparkling wine. You first have a still wine, and then you ferment it again, and that the CO2 that results from that fermentation is captured in the bottle, and that's what makes it sparkling.
So are sparkling wines also, dry farm wines, sparkling wines and champagnes, are they also sugar-free or nearly sugar-free?
Yes, they are.
Fantastic, she said for herself.
So they are. And then we have all kinds of sparkling wines, sparkling rosés, sparkling whites, sparkling reds, lambruscos. There are all kinds of different sparkling wines, including those that are made in Champagne. But back to the sugar question. This gets back to fermentation. So let's talk about how wine is made. And this is true for both red and white. The only difference in red and white is that red gets the skin, seeds, and stems added to the tank during fermentation. But here's how you make wine. Remember, we talked about a spontaneous fermentation from native yeast. See, because in natural wine, well, in any grape, everything needed to make wine is already present in and on the grape, because there's yeast on every grape. So that's the reason we call it a spontaneous fermentation with natural wine, because you press the juice into the tank, along with it goes the yeast, comes off the skin, and once it reaches a temperature that will activate the yeast, because if it's too cold it won't activate, just like when you're baking, you have to put the bread above the refrigerator in the oven where it's warm enough to activate the yeast, right?
That makes sense.
So once it reaches a temperature that will activate the yeast, it will be a spontaneous fermentation, because everything required to make wine is already included in and on the grape, which is sugar and yeast. So here's how wine is made. You have a fermentation, whether you create or whether it's spontaneous in natural wines. You inoculate it in conventional wines, but in natural wines it's spontaneous. The yeast activates and it starts to eat the sugar. It's like a little Pac-Man.
Oh,
so
okay.
When yeast eats the sugar, the byproduct of that is ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. So this gets a little bit technical, but easy enough to follow. How you get a sugar-free wine and a lower alcohol wine, and those are two different topics, but how you get a sugar-free wine is if the winemaker allows the yeast to eat all of the available sugar. Now, there's a little device, it's very uncomplicated. There's a little device that hangs in the tank in the wine that tells the winemaker at any given time exactly how much sugar is left in the juice. Remember I said not all natural wines are sugar-free. Ours are. If the winemaker, as a matter of style, allows the fermentation to complete, meaning the yeast eats all available sugar, the yeast will then die because they don't have anything to eat. And the fermentation at that point is complete and total, and that wine will be sugar-free because the yeast ate it all. Now, what happens in wine that's not sugar-free is that they break the fermentation process intentionally. When they see the amount of sugar they want to leave behind in the wine, they break off the ferment. With conventional wines, they dump sulfur dioxide into it, which kills the yeast. Leaving exactly, in the industry, it's called RS, or residual sugar. So sugar is not added to wine. How sugar gets in wine is the winemaker, as a matter of his style, his or her style, breaks the fermentation, leaving the desired amount of sugar behind in the wine. That's how sugar gets in wine, or how wine becomes sugar-free. And as I said earlier, the only way you're going to know if a wine is sugar-free is to lab test it. Now, the winemaker does the winemaker does do lab testing as a matter of his own information, and he or she knows exactly how much wine is in it after it's finished its fermentation. And when he has finished
how much wine, or do you mean how much sugar?
How much? Well, yes, how much sugar. So as a matter, most appellation rules require the winemaker to submit lab tests to show that his wines meet the criteria of. So everybody knows how much sugar is in the wines, just nobody publishes it.
And they're not required to.
And they're not required to. We do. We publish on every one of our wines following lab testing, but it's not done in the industry.
Todd, just wonder, have you considered, or why haven't you considered, farming your own wines here domestically?
Well,
meet your own standards.
There's a number of reasons for that. The primary reason is that, well, there are two primary reasons. From a self-interest point of view, I don't want to be in the farming business.
I get it.
Because there are inherent risks called weather and all kinds of other uncontrollable factors that create business risk in farming that I'm not interested in.
From an entrepreneurial standpoint, you've got a model that works.
Right.
Why
Number two, it's virtually impossible in any place you would want to grow grapes that produce high quality fruit. It's virtually impossible to produce a domestic wine naturally, organically, and dry farmed at $25 a bottle.
There you go.
For a number of reasons. First of all, land cost in the United States makes it nearly prohibitive. Organic and dry farming also much more expensive, which is why 99% of U.S. vineyards are irrigated, because it's cheaper to farm. And less than 10% are organic because it's cheaper to farm, right? It's a lot easier to farm when you pump water and nitrogen into a grapevine, and it's a lot easier to farm and mitigate risk when you spray a bunch of chemicals around.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not really attainable. It's not possible. Everything's possible, but it's not likely that you, and no one does it, by the way. There are natural wine producers in the United States, probably about 25. None of them meet our criteria.
Wow.
But
picky.
And well, we see ourselves as a health food company, not a wine company. And so our criteria, picky as it be, is really all around health. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of that's the lens we think through.
So you ship. It's a membership-based model, which I get. Are there certain states that you are prohibited from shipping to? And if so, what are those, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. So there are 5. Most of them, excluding one, most of them don't contain a high population of healthy consumers. So one is Mississippi, Missouri, Alabama, Kentucky, and Utah. Now there is a considerable health
How about
movement.
Michigan? Is Michigan one that you are shipping to?
Michigan is in and out, but I think it's back on again.
Nice.
So I'm not. It has been. There's been controversy there.
Okay.
It was turned off. I think it's turned back on now.
And how about Canada?
No, we don't ship yet to Canada. The Canadian alcohol laws are by province, so it's not super simple.
Yeah.
We get a lot of requests. We just, our business, the demand for what we do has been extraordinarily high in the United States, and so we just really haven't had time. And we also have a supply issue because there's very little natural wine in the world, and we buy we're the largest buyer. So when you combine the pandemic, shipping constraints, the finite amount of global supply of this wine, we barely get enough wine as it is to satisfy our customers.
Wow, that's not a bad problem to have. One of the questions I got from folks was with regard to, hold on, let me pull it up here. Great question. For those folks who do track their macros and love the fact that you have a wine option for them or champagne option for them that is sugar-free and 0 or less than 1 carb, I believe. What about the calories?
Well, calories we don't measure. It's a different kind of thing that requires a different level of food testing at a specialty lab. We don't track it. Here's what I can tell you. Most of them are sub 90 calories per serving. They're going to be 75 to 90 calories in the spot testing that we've done.
That's super helpful.
I'll tell you another reason that we don't think a lot about that, because from our point of view, calories don't really matter. I mean, just in general. I don't think about calories. I only eat once a day, as I talked about earlier. People say, well, do you get enough calories? It's like, well, I don't think about calories. What I think about is controlling my blood sugar. What I think about is glycemic response. I never give calories a thought. And so one way or the other, do I have too many or too little? What I'm trying to control is my body's glycemic response to food or beverage. I'm trying to maintain a steady to low blood glucose at all times. That's my goal. And from the point of view that I come from, how I think about health and our followers and people who conferences I speak at, and it's a pretty metabolic health. I think about metabolic health and metabolic flexibility.
Yeah.
I don't think about calories at all.
Right.
So therefore, it's not really important to us or to me, but I can tell you it's a range of 75 to 90 calories a glass, per serving. That's just a range. It's certainly not any higher than that and not any lower.
And lastly, I wanted to ask you about those folks who are like, well, I am really concerned with my sugar intake. And so therefore I do a vodka and seltzer, or I do, some other,
tequila.
I'm not doing, tequila. Let's say tequila and lime. What do those folks need to know about what they're consuming?
Well, it's real simple. I don't disagree with this point of view. So in the biohacking community, which, just to define biohacking quickly for those of you who don't know, biohacking, the definition of that, the most common biohack is a diet. But the definition of biohacking is the way we alter our behavior to positively influence our biological or neurological outcome. Altering our behavior in a diet is a biohack. There are many biohacks: cold thermogenesis, hot and cold, supplements, brain waves, electro, blah, blah. There's lots of biohacks. It can be complicated and weird, or it can be as simple as a diet. But in the biohacking movement, where I'm a leader and speaker, that it's a very commonly held belief that you should drink tequila, more so than vodka, because vodka is often derived from grains or potatoes, and tequila is derived from this plant. And I'm just telling you the methodology. I don't agree with all that. Doesn't matter. Distilled alcohol is distilled alcohol, and it's pure. It's clear distilled alcohol, whether it's tequila, as long as it's clear.
Correct.
If it's brown, that's different. But I'm talking brown liquors contain sugars and other things that are not healthy. But let's just talk about clear vodka, or not gin, because that's made different. We talk about vodka and tequila. But inside the biohacking movement, tequila is sort of, the spirit of choice. And philosophically and scientifically, I agree with that assessment. If you're going to drink spirits, you should probably drink tequila or vodka. My problem with it, and the reason I don't recommend it or drink it, is because it's too high in alcohol. So it's 45% alcohol. It's 45% ethyl alcohol versus the 10% wines that I drink. Most of the wines I drink, because I can choose my wines, most of the wines I drink are between 9 and 11% alcohol. I occasionally drink 12 or 12.5%, but I prefer the taste and the effect, because I drink about a bottle a day. I prefer the taste and the effect of a 9 to 11 or 12% alcohol. If I'm consuming tequila, it's 45% by volume. And so I'm trying to drink, I'm consciously, as a matter of health, brain health, body health, and my mental health, I'm intentionally trying to drink less alcohol. That's a goal of mine. It's both a health and lifestyle goal, and I'm aging. I'm 61. So it's like,
Well, you look amazing, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that's very kind. But so I'm trying to drink less alcohol. Like, I'm not trying to consume more or less calories, but I am trying to drink less alcohol.
So 2 questions to play devil's advocate. If it's, 45% alcohol, is that what you said, typical tequila?
Yes.
So then, if I'm playing devil's advocate, but I'm going to have one shot or one drink, if you will, versus having to drink a whole bottle, and I'm still at now 40% if I'm doing the math correctly.
Well, that's a great question. It's a great question, but let me tell you why that's wrong. Alcohol, for most people, not everyone, but for most people, alcohol is what I call a domino drug. Now, what does that mean? It means the more you drink, or the higher concentration of alcohol that you get early, the more likely you are to drink more.
True.
I don't know if that's your experience, but it's certainly been my experience. Yeah. The more I drink, the more likely I am to drink more. And the more I drink earlier, the faster I'll drink it.
Yeah.
So therefore, this domino drug effect, the higher the alcohol content, the more slippery the slope.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. That's so true. So then what about
I give a lot of intentional thought about, this is a drug.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I give a lot of intentional thought about how to maximize the pleasure from this drug and minimizing the risk.
Well, and let's talk about the risk then, and I'm not trying to at all say like, don't drink tequila, don't drink vodka. I'm just like trying to help my listener understand how to evaluate their own risks, right? Like, if I'm going to do this, which is the lesser of the 2 evils? You've said yourself that alcohol is in fact toxic. So if I'm choosing like, oh, okay, that's what we just learned, that most biohackers drink tequila, then I'm good.
No, I didn't say most biohackers drink tequila. I said among the spirits
of choice. Got it.
Spirits of choice. Most of them probably drink natural wine, but
if they're made here in the United States, aren't we looking at the very same risks where we don't actually know what is in the bottle?
I'm sorry, I missed that question.
I mean, if it's a domestic made tequila, aren't we looking at the very same risk where we don't even know what's in the bottle?
Well, that's true.
And especially these ready-made mix, right? Where you're getting like the skinny margarita.
The ready-made stuff is full of all kinds of additives. And there is, on those, on many of those, depending upon what's in it or how it's made, some of those are required because they go through a different labeling process. So spirits and wine are controlled, the label is controlled by the TTB, which is the Trade and Tax Bureau. It used to be the ATF before Waco. It was alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. They renamed it the TTB. It was a little more gentle.
Got it.
So the TTB controls labeling on spirits and wine. But for other products like kombuchas or beer or seltzers, that labeling is controlled by the FDA. And that's a different set of requirements. So your premixes usually have the ingredients listed on the bottle.
Well, that's interesting to know. Well, this has been phenomenally informative, and I really appreciate your honest approach to it, and just being very transparent about the fact that it is a toxin. We do need to consume less alcohol, and it's about evaluating risk, right? Like understanding, like, gosh, you can drive yourself crazy looking at all the different ways that we can live longer and enjoy life. You can drive yourself crazy. And I think it's really important, though, that people understand there is a way to still consume alcohol that's maybe much healthier, if you will. Is that how you would describe it?
I think in closing, the other thing that comes to mind, I was just talking with Mark Sisson on the phone. Mark lives in Miami and is a longtime friend and has endorsed our wine for years. And I was talking with Mark on the phone last week about longevity. And because we're considering sort of getting in another business related to longevity, not wine. And we were talking about longevity and said, and I was thinking about creating this conference around it. And I asked Mark if, what his thoughts were and would he speak. And he's like, sure, of course. But he said, I'm going to say something different. What made me think of this is you're talking about we can go crazy trying to figure this stuff out. And we want to have pleasures in our life. And Mark made a great point. And I think it's worth thinking about, particularly for people who are kind of hyper obsessed with all this kind of thing like me, is that Mark said, but I'm going to speak about something that nobody's talking about. And, it's going to be a different angle. And that is that, look, I've written a bunch of books on keto. I've been he's the godfather of paleo. He's probably the most well-respected internet health authority that has been publishing Mark's Daily Apple forever.
Yes.
So he's super credible. He said, look, Mark's 60, I think he's 66. He's 65 or 66. He looks great. And he said, I'm going to tell people, look, I'm at a place in my life where, pleasure is really important to me. And, some days I'm going to have a slice of pie. And some days, like in my case, I'm going to eat French fries, although I know they're not good for me. And he said, some days I drink too much. And, so I'm going to suggest that people not only be concerned about longevity and health span, but also pleasure and enjoyment.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we got to find that balance.
Yeah.
For me, I'm more pleasurable. For me, I feel so much better living the lifestyle I'd live that I choose to make what other people might consider sacrifices, like eating once a day, because I feel so much better. And to me, as a hedonist, feeling better is the ultimate pleasure, which is why I believe that exercisers drink more, right? Because I think they like feeling better. And so, which is why I drink. I enjoy getting high. Right? It's just like kind of a thing. I do it every day unless I'm on an extended water fast.
I love it.
Right? I don't drink during the daytime, but I do drink at night. And so anyhow, so I think Mark's point of view about this, look, we've got to, we have to have indulgent pleasure along the way as well. It's part of living. It's part of being human.
Well, if you look at centurions, that's the one thing that they all seem to have in common is a level of happiness. And there's a lot to say about that, about community to everyone has that story of their uncle who lived to be 99 years old and ate bacon every day and, drank every night. and smoke
Right.
cigarettes. You know, we've
Right.
all had these stories where it's like, and then there's the guy who lived his life with pristine diet and paid attention.
Dropped
to
dead of a heart attack at 50.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, so these things happen.
Well, fortunately, we can prevent
A lot of that.
a lot of that just through being proactive and body scanning and looking for these problems and stress testing. You know, so we can avoid. You know, these rich people who drop dead at 60 of a heart attack is a head scratcher to me, because it's like these tools are available out there for
Yeah.
you to tell you exactly the condition of your heart. And there's a new blood test that just came out. It's expensive, but there's a new blood test that just came out that will detect up to 50 cancers before they develop. It just came out. It's just the buzz. It's about $1,500, but
Wow.
and it's not covered by insurance at the
Well,
moment.
you know what
but
we don't have yet is a way to accurately track happiness, and I think that has a lot to do with longevity.
It does. I recommend a bottle a day for that. A bottle of natural wines for happiness. On that note.
On that note, that's awesome. Well, thank you again, Todd, for joining us, and I just appreciate your candor and the mission that you're on, and thank you so much, because I'm in love with your sparkling wines.
Oh, great.
I've
Nice.
changed my boxes out. That's what we go for. And anyways, just a treat to have you here. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Okay, so the way Dry Farm Wines worked, in case you didn't pick all that up from this interview, is it's a subscription-based company. And again, please, you don't have to use my affiliate code, but if you do, you get a penny off of, or I'm sorry, for a penny, you get a free extra bottle. That means when you start your subscription, which you can start with you can start a subscription where you just get 3 bottles. Trust me, you're going to go through 3 bottles very quickly. And if you don't love it, you can cancel. They curate their bottles, right? So they curate the box, I should say. So you can say, I want 2 whites and 1 red. You can tell them what you want. I want all sparkling. But once you get the bottles of wine, because they're all from different vineyards, if you try one, you're like, I don't love this, tell them. Just send them an email and they'll curate a different box for you. Here's my pro tip. Once you find your favorite vineyards, your favorite wines, etc., then you can curate your box so it has all of your favorites in it. It's great. However, then you'll get sick of them and you should try some new ones, because I've discovered so many incredible vineyards and different flavors and profiles, and the sparkling wines are just amazing. And if you ever don't love one of your selections, you can just tell them and they won't put that back in your box again. If you don't love it, you can cancel after a month. And in order to get the special where you get an extra bottle for just a penny, you go to dryfarmwines.com/Chalene, and that's how you'll get that extra bottle of wine. And, you know, it's great for gifting. I mean, why not give a healthier bottle of wine next time you're going to a dinner party, right? All right. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for hitting the notification so you know when I upload my next video, and dropping a comment below. Bye, guys.